We are 130 days away from the midterm elections, and there's a moment in every relationship where the people who have been covering for you stop covering for you. Not because they had a change of heart, but because the math changed. And we may be at that moment. Start with this. New inflation numbers came out today. 4.1%. These are May numbers, meaning they don't actually capture June's gas prices, which the Iran war pushed yet higher. So the number next month, the month from today, may be worse. Except you're looking at the screen that says 4.1%. You know what? You know how many people need to know that? Zero. No one needs to know the inflation rate because you feel it every time you fill up your tank, you buy groceries, or you pay your rent. That's what is going to move voters in November. And the party responsible right now is the Republican Party because they control everything. And against that backdrop, what is Trump focused on? Not prices, not the economy, a voter suppression bill. But I just put that aside for a second. Before I get to the voter suppression bill, understand what is happening to and within the Republican Party right now, because it's not just one thing. It's a pattern. Just within this last week, Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene both renounced the Republican Party, citing the Iran war as a betrayal of America first. Populist podcasters who helped build the MAGA media machine, Theo Vaughn, Tim Dillon, Candace Owens, they've all turned fiercely critical of the administration. And then there's Epstein. 4 Republicans in the House called themselves the Bravehearts. They forced the release of the Epstein files that Trump didn't want released, files that the American public had been promised. Of those 4, only one will return to Congress. On the left, Thomas Massie, he lost the most expensive House primary in American history, over $34 million spent against him. Marjorie Taylor Greene resigned. Nancy Mace lost her governor's race after Trump withheld his endorsement of her. Lauren Boebert is the only one likely to remain in Congress next year. That's the context for tonight. A president using the full force of his political machine to punish members of his own party who ask inconvenient questions while the economy worsens and the party he's supposed to be leading heads into the most consequential midterm of his presidency without a single kitchen table win to show for it. Republicans desperately needed something to take home to voters before November. And Congress actually built it. It was called the 21st Century Road to Housing Act. It's the most comprehensive housing legislation in decades. It would increase the supply of homes, bring down the costs, restrict the large institutional investors who've been buying up single-family homes and pricing ordinary Americans out of their own neighborhoods. This bill passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. Look at those numbers. You don't see those numbers for anything. Margins large enough to override a presidential veto. 166 Republican representatives voted with Democrats on it. 42 Republicans voted with Democrats in the Senate on it. Because they understood what their constituents understand. That if you can't afford to rent and you can't afford to buy and nobody in Washington is doing anything about it, the answer is going to be no. And this is what Republicans did. This is the evidence they showed up. Trump just set the whole thing on fire. He won't sign the bill. Not until the Senate passes the Save America Act. Now, let's be precise about what that bill actually is, because the housing bill and this voting bill are two entirely different and unrelated things, and it's important that you understand both of them. The Save America Act would require every American to show documentary proof of citizenship, a passport or a birth certificate, not a driver's license, not a military ID, just to register to vote. The Senate had voted on it. It failed 48 to 50. Republicans didn't even have a simple majority, let alone the 60 actual votes needed to overcome a filibuster. And the Republican senators who voted no were not doing it to protect Democratic voters. They had their own reasons. Mitch McConnell wrote that the bill would allow a future president to carry out a complete federal takeover of American elections. Lisa Murkowski called it unconstitutional and noted that 20% of Alaska's population isn't on the road system, meaning that some of her constituents would need to buy a plane ticket to go register to vote. Tom Tillis called the whole effort goofy, not because he opposes voter ID, but because every hour spent on a bill that cannot pass is an hour not spent on something that could actually help Republicans before November. These are the reasons the Senate won't move on this. And when the Senate refused to budge before leaving for a 17-day recess, frustration in the House boiled over. A group of conservatives led by the Florida Republican Anna Paulina Luna has now frozen the House floor entirely. No votes, no legislation, nothing moves until the Senate comes back and passes a bill that it has already rejected. So this is where we are. The House is frozen. The Senate's on vacation. The housing bill is unsigned. Inflation is rising. Gas prices are up. And the members of Trump's own party who dared to ask inconvenient questions have been systematically removed from Congress. Now, let's be honest about what this voting bill actually is. The premise is false. Non-citizen voting essentially does not exist in America. I have lots of examples, but tonight I'm going to give you Utah. Utah examined 2 million registered voters and found, hope you're sitting down for this, 1 confirmed non-citizen registration and 0 instances of non-citizens actually voting. The architecture itself is suppression. It's built to make registration harder for people without passports or matching birth certificates who are disproportionately Democrats. But the execution is incompetent because the states with the lowest passport ownership in America are red states. You can't write a bill restricting voting to people with passports and then pretend that you didn't just disenfranchise rural Republicans in Mississippi and West Virginia. Mitch McConnell and Lisa Murkowski will tell you it may not even survive a constitutional challenge. This is not a stupid bill based on a false premise. It's a cynical bill based on a false premise that turned out to be a stupid bill. It's not about election integrity. It's about Donald Trump's lack of integrity and his desperation. If Republicans lose the House in November, Donald Trump faces impeachment. The SAVE Act is his insurance policy. For him, he's blocking a bill that helps Americans afford homes to force a bill that could disenfranchise his own voters to protect himself from a Congress that's running out of patience with him. Republicans are swimming for the lifeboat, and he keeps on pulling that lifeboat further and further away. Trump's grip on his party has always rested on one calculation, that crossing him costs more than covering for him. And tonight, that calculation is changing. Joining me now is Jason Stanley, professor at the Munk School at the University of Toronto and author of Erasing History, How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Control the Future. Also joining me, Joe Walsh, former Republican congressman from Illinois. He's now a Democrat and host of the Social Contract podcast, and Juanita Tolliver, award-winning author and host of the Archival podcast. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being with us. Hey, Joe, I got a little trivia for you. I'm in Philadelphia for an event that Jen Psaki and Rachel Maddow and I did. And the last time I used this studio for my show was January the 15th, 2021. And you were my guest on the show that day. So welcome back. You got staying power around here. I want to start with you because you have crossed Donald Trump. You have been one of those people who crossed Donald Trump. He's unforgiving, and in most cases, it's worked. He's primaried people against most people who crossed him, and it's worked. He's running out of political capital. And I say this with caution because betting against Donald Trump has been very difficult for the last decade. But something's happening.
Hey, Ali, it's always so good to be with you, and it's good to be with you on this new show of yours. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer and ruin this segment. But I look...
Not 54 seconds in, hopefully, yeah.
From my perspective, my former political party, my former colleagues, they're in an abusive relationship, and they've been in this relationship forever. I mean, from the moment he was sworn in, Donald Trump has done nothing to help Republicans in the midterms. Trump doesn't give a damn about how Republicans do in the midterm, and yet Republicans continue to generally stand with him. And I don't think that's going to change. You're going to have a smattering of Republicans who will continue to speak out against him, but the vast majority are tied to him, Ali, and I don't think they're going to do anything. They can't, in other words. They can't do anything to separate themselves from him before the midterms. They're going to win or lose with him. They're going to go down with him.
Juanita, talk to me about this for a second, because there's a temptation if one is a Democrat or one doesn't like Donald Trump, to let this implode, let this infighting continue. But there's also primaries, and there are people who are out there who are running for something. You may agree with them or you may not agree with them. You can watch what happened in New York on Tuesday night. You might like Zoran Mamdani and the Democratic Socialists. You might think that they're damaging to the party. But the bottom line is there are people who are running for something. What's the corollary to this? Because you've got Republicans doing whatever it is they're doing. What do Democrats do right now?
I think they continue to present a positive vision for this nation, because one thing that Democrats have working in their favor right now is with this Republican infighting and congressional Republicans having nothing to take home to their constituents, i.e. the voters they're going to be begging to turn out in November. Democrats have an advantage with enthusiasm right now. A recent NPR Marist poll highlighted that Democrats are polling at 2018 midterm levels of enthusiasm. And we know that was a massive cycle for Democrats. Now, Republicans are, on the other hand, are well below that 2018 benchmark by 12 points. And at present, in 2026, Democrats have a 9-point advantage on Republicans in terms of enthusiasm. Democratic candidates need to tap into that energy. They need to drive up turnout, because when you listed all of the potential impacts of the voter suppression law that Donald Trump is trying to advance through Congress, pair that with the redistricting that we know happened at an irregular schedule across states, Republican-held states, after Donald Trump told Texas to do it, this is going to require massive turnout from Democrats.
Right.
And so they have to present an explicitly positive vision for voters to be motivated by, because it's not good enough, as 2014 showed us, it's not good enough to say, hey, Trump and Republicans are bad. No. Tell us what you will do if you retain control of the House.
So, Jason, I'm going to do a terribly unfair thing. I'm going to disagree with Joe Walsh, but I'm actually going to ask you the question so Joe doesn't get to even talk about it. I think generally I agree with Joe that Donald Trump really doesn't care about Republicans, but he does care about one thing. There is a possibility that it gets impeached again. Jamie Raskin has been talking about it a lot. So to Juanita's point, they're trying to win seats without winning voters, right? Whether it's redistricting or voter suppression, it's the idea of winning seats without getting one extra vote. Feels kind of like things we've seen in history in terms of dictatorships and totalitarianism.
Yeah, I was going to say I disagree with the premise of this discussion. They're trying to steal the midterms. They're already stealing the midterms, which is why they're not trying to broaden their popular support. Donald Trump doesn't care at all about broadening his popular support. The machine behind him doesn't care. J.D. Vance is going through this normalization tour right now, but we know he is the one who urged Trump to invoke the Insurrection Act. So what is ICE going to do? ICE is going to flood the streets during the election after they do all the shenanigans with redistricting, with the Supreme Court behind them. They've already, the Prairieland sentences, they've sentenced supposed Antifa for a noise demonstration to 450 years in prison collectively. So if you protest against ICE, that's what you face. They have multiple ways to steal the midterms. That's why they're not trying to win popular support. I agree, we're still in a competitive authoritarian situation where a massive voter swell will still prevent them, as we saw in Hungary. But they're trying to steal the midterms, which is why they don't care at all about attracting voters. And so the whole discussion, the discussion we're having is a little off in that sense.
Well, Joe, the Hungary example is actually a pretty good one, even though people don't think about it all the time. But this is a country that many of us had written off as being, a competitive autocracy. People can still vote, but somehow the opposition party can never win, and the press is controlled by the government, and yet they voted out their guy. So the fact is, Americans do have agency, and as Juanita talks about, the statistics bear out. There's remarkable enthusiasm amongst Democrats, even in what you would think of as Republican states or largely Republican-leaning states. Democrats are matching and in some cases exceeding primary turnout. Now, again, primaries are not elections, as you well know, because you've run for president, but there is something there. People still believe they have agency.
Yeah, but what was just said, Ali, is the biggest takeaway to everybody listening to us right now. Trump's going to do everything he can do to mess with the midterms, and to stop the midterms from happening. That's what he's all about. And a lot of Republicans privately know that. and they're banking on it. I mean, my God, the President of the United States was out there again today talking about putting troops on the ground in Democratic cities. This is what they're trying to do. I will tell you, Ali, that, again, they believe, Republicans believe these elections in New York were a sudden gift to them. So they're going to use that, like, you know, they use defund the police, and they're going to try to paint every Democrat as a crazy socialist. That will be their last attempt to try to succeed in the midterms. But no, they know that. And so they're going to try to suppress the vote and mess with the results as much as they can.
But, you know, Juanita, Trump passed the whole socialist thing. He just called them communists, the people who Zohran Mamdani backed in New York who ended up winning. I don't know if I'm the only one around here. I happen to think that a party that uses the democratic process to fight out its battles and figure out who it is healthy.
Imagine.
We might be a little close to the midterms for this, but I think it's great, right? We're playing it out. And by the way, Zohran Mamdani can back democratic socialists in New York and win, and maybe that doesn't work in Texas, and maybe it doesn't work in Georgia. Maybe it's not one size fits all, but I think these fights are meaningful for the long-term existence of a political party.
The long-term existence and the health of the candidates, Ali. What we saw in New York, I think, is testament to the value of listening to voters. And to any centrist Democrats or any Democrats who are concerned about these candidates winning, I'm going to say, this is exactly what should happen in 2028. This is not just a lesson right now for 2026 midterms. Any candidate who chooses to seek public office, who chooses to seek higher office and has an explicit connection with the community, who is responsive and visible in fighting for the needs of the people they're seeking to represent, deserves a chance to run and by their peers. That is absolutely the format. And I think Democrats better get ready, because I know 2028 is going to be a wild, wild west primary, but you better back up and listen to the voters, because they are hankering for an opportunity to be heard, to be able to invest and select in the candidate who they think is going to best represent them, even if they defy the logic or the norms or standards of what usually is a coronation process. But that's out the window. And I think this moment also reminds me of how Democrats treated the challengers in primaries in 2018, in that midterm cycle, where there was this negative sentiment, this unwelcoming environment on Capitol Hill after they were sworn in. And the reality is Democrats better not repeat that process. Whoever voters select absolutely should be welcomed into every caucus opportunity in Capitol Hill and beyond, because what you're doing would be rejecting the democratic outcome of a fair and clear election.